Welcome into the Rock Talk Studio, your source for in-depth recommendations on rock and roll books and documentaries. Looking for a new good rock and roll book or doc to check out? Well, here comes the inside scoop on all the details on the top recommendations and hidden gems you don't want to miss. I'm your host, Big Rick. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens, and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. And today, the spotlight falls on a great book. It's called Conversations with Tom Petty by Paul Zollo. Did you ever want to just sit down and talk music with Tom Petty? I think I know the answer for most of you, but I'm not just talking about a quick interview or something like that. I'm talking about every Saturday for a couple of years, you get to go up to Tom Petty's house, sit down with him, and just kick back and talk about his life and his music. Well, that's what author Paul Zollo did. And that's what this book, Conversations with Tom Petty, is all about. From 2004 to 2005, Zollo and Petty met in Tom's house in Malibu, with the one goal being to create a complete record of Petty's body of work with his memories of his writing and recording every song up until that time. And this book is the expanded edition of those conversations. The original book came out in 2005, and it was the first authorized book to focus solely on Petty's life and work. Zollo said he always dreamed of putting together the expanded edition to include the 12 years of Petty's work since they last spoke like this. Unfortunately, the last album they were able to discuss was The Highway Companion. The book is divided into 3 sections. The first part is a biographical interview. The second is a breakdown of every album going through his songs and inspiration. And the third part, which contains most of the new material, is interviews, articles, and reviews. There is some overlap, and that goes without saying because the life conversation contains a lot of talk about the albums. Here's what I liked about each section. The first part of the book, you instantly get how casual and relaxed this conversation is going to be. Petty is obviously at ease with Zollo. You can almost hear that famous Petty drawl coming through the pages. And with this comfort comes a lot of deep answers to the questions posed to Tom. He's very meticulous in remembering long forgotten moments and very detailed with his response. Zollo knows Petty's career well, and the questions go right at Tom's path to learning to play, his family members, band members, and views about Petty and how much he loved music. I really enjoyed how Petty talked so just openly about his friendships with other artists. George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Dave Stewart, Jeff Lynne, and of course, his band, the Heartbreakers. Petty was so open and descriptive that I actually felt like I got a really good sense for what George Harrison was like as a person. Great stories about Dave Stewart and Dylan, all of them, really. Petty was very forthcoming in this book and how these idols of his became his friends and how they got together and created some of the best music in Petty's career. Part 2, the second part, is the songs, and this is Petty Geek Central. It's a dissection of every album and most of the songs from the album. Timeless Petty legend discussed here. I could list a ton of examples because Zollo and Tom are all about exploring how these songs come together, and there are just way too many amazing stories to tell. I mean, they were talking about chord progressions, lyric inspirations, recording techniques, bridge sections. I don't think there's much they didn't get to about the songs. And as we all know, Petty, he just wrote a ton of great songs, so there's so much really juicy material here. It's almost like every famous song had a one-in-a-million tale that went along with it. And this is where Zollo really shows his chops. He knows these songs really well. And the questions, they're just spot on, and they point out a ton of little intricacies, little things that make this book so good. It's such an engaging conversation. And the main reason behind that is Zollo's background. Zollo's a singer-songwriter. He's an author and photographer and music writer, and he wrote a great book, Songwriters on Songwriting, and it's a collection of interviews with heavyweights: Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, Frank Zappa, Leonard Cohen, Carly Simon. And the main reason why Petty agreed to these interviews in the first place was because he enjoyed the interview Zollo did with Dylan in that book, Songwriters on Songwriting. The third section includes additional interviews, articles, and reviews. There is a review of the final show at the Hollywood Bowl, which Zollo attended and reviewed. And then there's an article he did after Tom died. So the interview parts, again, cover ground that has been covered before. And if I have to say anything negative about this book, and it kind of pains me too, there is a little overlap of a few subjects and answers to similar questions. That's really the only negative thing I've got to say about this book. The book starts with a 4-page conversation with Petty's wife, Dana, and then there's reprints of the original foreword that was done by Petty himself. Then you get another reprint of the introduction to the first edition. And this had some really great stories of how Zollo and Tom would get together and the upbeat mode that Tom brought to the memories. And then finally, the introduction to the expanded editions including really, really cool stories about what it was like to hang out with Tom Petty. There are 24 pictures included. They're split into 3 sections of the book with captions by Petty himself. This is such a great celebration of Tom Petty and the amazing talent that he was. I don't think there is an artist who put out so much great material as consistent as Petty did. He is one of a kind, and I really think this book is too. It is such a treasure. We're so blessed to have this record of Tom's thoughts and his views and his words. This book is just really, I think it's going to go down as one of the great rock and roll books because of what it captures and how truthful and open Tom Petty was. Conversation with Tom Petty, the expanded edition by Paul Zollo. I highly, highly recommend this one. And all that's really left is our weekly one big question. And to me, I think there's really only one question here because of how outstanding this book is, but you have to ask, if you bought the original edition that came out in 2005, is this expanded edition worth your money? Before I move on, I want to do something that I haven't done for a while, and that is take a moment here and shout out to the people that are listening to the show, because I'm very grateful for the people that tune in almost weekly to the show. And though I don't know your names, I do know where you're listening from, and I just want to let you know that I really appreciate it. Without you, I don't think there would really be a show. Without the interactions that I have with people about rock and roll books and documentaries, there really wouldn't be as much motivation for me to do this. I like to provide value. I like to talk about rock and roll books and documentaries and tip people on what I think is really cool and what I think you're going to enjoy too. So I want to shout out to Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you. Melbourne, Victoria, Amherst, New Hampshire, Frankfurt, Hesse, my Connecticut posse, Danbury, Connecticut, Southern Connecticut, Madison, Connecticut, Tulsa, Oklahoma. I see you and I thank you. Brooklyn, New York, Austin, Texas. Thank you very much. Tampa, Florida, Toronto, Ontario, Chicago, Illinois, Charlotte, North Carolina. They're listening in Victoria, British Columbia, and Escondido, California, just to name a few people. I just wanted to recognize those folks who are out there. Whoever you may be, I thank you so much for supporting the Rock Talk Studio. Okay, let's tackle today's big question about the Tom Petty book. The one big question this week about Conversations with Tom Petty, the expanded edition, is, well, is the expanded edition worth getting if you have the original version? Here's, first of all, is what you get in the expanded edition. You've got an interview for Tom's website that Zollo did before he started writing this book. It was kind of like an audition for Petty, and it was just used at that time on Petty's website. This was 2004. It's a fairly repetitive, overarching career perspective that you kind of get in the book. There are some different avenues that they do veer off into, though. There's also an article that was written in 2019, Tom, Woody, and the Genius of Simplicity, talking about Woody Guthrie and Tom Petty and songwriting. Simplicity, obviously, is a word that I would say is the most synonymous with Petty. He is the king of simplicity. And then there's a review of Petty and the Heartbreaker Show in the Forum, Los Angeles Forum, 2014. You've got a review of Petty's last studio album, Hypnotic Eye. There was an interview that Zollo did with people about the Beatles and their impact of seeing them on Ed Sullivan's show. He included Petty in this, and there's only a couple of pages to this, but it's pretty cool. The Beatles played a big part in who Tom Petty was and how much music meant to him. A concert review of Petty and the Heartbreakers' last show at the Hollywood Bowl is included. that Zollo himself and his son attended. And finally, you get an in memorandum article, The Life and Times of Tom Petty, that Zollo wrote 4 days after Tom died. All in all, a total of 78 extra pages. Completists will definitely want this. I think it might be a little bit of a stretch for Petty fans if you bought the first version in 2005 to go out and get this one. And that kind of pains me to say. I hate to say it because I don't think I need to repeat myself, but this book is not only a must for any Petty fans, any rock and roll fan is going to really, really enjoy this. It doesn't get much better. This is what I would call a front row center book. It's a one of a kind. It stands out from others. For those of you who knew me when I was doing my reviews, you know what a front row center is. It's that book that sets itself apart from others. It doesn't get any better than these conversations that the author had with Tom Petty. So I've got a great idea. If you have the original version, go out and buy a few of these, hand them out to your rock and roll buddies. They will definitely thank you for it. Coming up in next week's podcast, one of the strangest, most interesting rock and roll books I've ever read, and one of the best rock and roll books I've read this year. It's a 205-page memoir that is just dazzling. Here's a clue. In the last couple of shows, I've been giving out way too easy clues, so here's a tough one, 1967. And if you know, then you know, and if not, you'll find out in 7 days. Thanks for tuning in. Love talking rock and roll and be able to give you the scoop on a title I think is worth your time and money like this one today, Conversations with Tom Petty. Can't recommend that one enough. But if you want more recommendations, I got that for you too. You can check out Rock Talk Studio on Instagram, Threads, YouTube, and Facebook, where I talk about all the breaking news of rock and roll books and docs. All right, folks, tear it down, pack it up, head on down the road. We'll see you next time in the Rock Talk Studio.